What if I told you that everything you've ever believed about Meghan Markle and her daughter, Lilibet, might be a lie? That one of the most publicized and celebrated births in recent royal history, the supposed arrival of a little girl named Lilibet, never actually happened? Sounds impossible, right? But the evidence, the documents, and the testimonies that have emerged, primarily from an insider known only as Lady C, are so shocking that they force us to question the narrative that has dominated tabloids, news cycles, and social media for years. And make no mistake, this isn't just gossip. This is a story that touches the very heart of the British monarchy, its secrets, and a family drama that the world thought it understood. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the royal family, she was a figure of fascination. The world watched her every move, dissected every statement, and analyzed every appearance. Then came the birth of Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, a moment framed as joyous, historic, and deeply emotional. Headlines screamed with excitement, royal fans celebrated, and the public was encouraged to feel part of this intimate family event. But what if that story was carefully constructed to conceal the truth? What if Lady C, who has spent decades observing the royal household from within, is right? That Lilibet, as we've been told she exists, simply does not exist. Consider this. Why is it that even as photos, videos, and official announcements flooded the media, inconsistencies began to appear in every detail surrounding Lilibet's birth? Small contradictions that initially seemed trivial, timing discrepancies, conflicting accounts from staff, and the odd absence of credible photographic evidence, suddenly gained terrifying weight when seen in the context of Lady C's revelations. When someone inside the palace, someone with access to the inner workings of the family, comes forward with information this specific, the inconsistencies are no longer coincidences. They are pieces of a puzzle meticulously crafted to hide a truth few could even imagine. Lady C's credibility is not in question. Her years within the royal household provided her with an unparalleled view of the family dynamics, their protocols, and their secrets. She saw the subtle ways that narratives are shaped, how the public sees what the monarchy wants them to see, and how events are manipulated to protect reputations or obscure uncomfortable truths. In her first interview, she didn't start with accusations or scandalous claims. Instead, she presented her evidence slowly, letting the weight of her observations and the supporting documentation speak for themselves. It was methodical, deliberate, and chilling in its clarity. And what she revealed about Lilibet's supposed existence will shake the public perception of Meghan Markle in ways that tabloids alone could never achieve. Imagine for a moment the implications of this. If Lady C is correct, the entire story of Meghan as a mother to Lilibet is built on a foundation of carefully orchestrated deception. Every public statement, every media appearance, every carefully curated photograph, how much of it is real? And how much is part of a narrative designed to present a version of reality that doesn't actually exist? The ramifications extend beyond the personal. They touch on the very credibility of the royal family, the media outlets that propagated the story without question, and the millions of people who followed along, invested emotionally in a story that may have never happened. And yet, even as the evidence mounts, there are those who refuse to accept it. Loyalists, fans of Meghan, and defenders of the monarchy insist that such claims are impossible. They dismiss inconsistencies as minor errors, coincidences, or misunderstandings. But Lady C's revelations are different. They are precise, detailed, and backed by documentation and first-hand observations. When she speaks, she references events, timelines, and private communications that contradict the public narrative in ways that cannot easily be ignored. And it is in those contradictions that the most compelling story unfolds, a story of secrecy, deception, and the lengths to which those involved will go to protect an image that may be entirely fabricated. Throughout this video, we are going to explore those contradictions in detail. We'll look at the documents that Lady C has shared, examine her accounts of palace insiders, and analyze the evidence that suggests Lilibet may never have been born at all. We will explore the inconsistencies in Meghan Markle's statements, the timing of announcements, and the reactions of those closest to the royal family. We'll ask hard questions. If Lilibet does not exist, then who benefited from this story? Who orchestrated it? And why would such a deception be necessary? In a world where every detail is scrutinized and every birth in the royal family becomes an international event, you might be wondering how such a story could remain hidden for so long. How could the public, journalists, and even other members of the royal family remain unaware? The answer lies in the unique environment of the palace, where appearances are everything, information is tightly controlled, and secrecy is a way of life. Lady C explains that from the moment Meghan joined the family, the inner workings of the household were carefully managed to prevent leaks, control narratives, and maintain a particular image in the public eye. Photographs could be staged, appearances orchestrated, and even interactions with staff carefully monitored. In such an environment, it is entirely possible for a story of Lilibet's existence or non-existence to be meticulously crafted, protected, and propagated. As we move deeper into this exposé, you'll begin to see patterns that were previously invisible. Small details that seemed insignificant suddenly take on enormous importance. Moments in public appearances, discrepancies in reported timelines, and the absence of corroborating evidence all begin to point to a single, chilling conclusion: that Lilibet, as the world knows her, may never have existed. Lady C's testimony is the thread that pulls these pieces together, connecting seemingly unrelated events into a coherent, explosive narrative. It is a narrative that challenges everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, the royal family, and the stories they allow the public to believe. And yet, there is still more to uncover. Lady C has hinted at evidence so compelling that it cannot be dismissed. Documents that were hidden for reasons that are only beginning to be understood. Private communications that contradict public statements. Observations from trusted staff members who have remained silent until now. These pieces, when assembled, create a mosaic of truth that is as fascinating as it is disturbing. And the final revelations, those that Lady C has reserved for the most dramatic moments, promise to redefine the story entirely. But what makes this story truly extraordinary is not just the claim that Lilibet does not exist, it's the human drama behind it. The manipulation, the betrayals, the strategies employed to maintain a public image while concealing private truths. The lengths to which people will go to protect reputations, control narratives, and shape public perception are staggering. And as we will see, the consequences of these actions ripple far beyond the walls of the palace, touching journalists, fans, and ordinary people who believe they were witnessing an authentic moment in history. In the chapters to come, we will dive into the timeline of events, analyze key public appearances, and examine the testimonies that make Lady C's claims so difficult to ignore. We will trace the inconsistencies in Meghan's story, explore the reactions of palace insiders, and investigate the gaps in media coverage that allowed this narrative to flourish unchecked. Each chapter will bring us closer to understanding the shocking reality behind the headlines. A reality that may force us all to reconsider what we thought we knew about one of the most high-profile families in the world. By the end of this video, you may feel a sense of disbelief, shock, or even betrayal. The story that has been presented to the public for years may unravel before your eyes, revealing a truth that is both extraordinary and unsettling. And yet, there is also an opportunity here. A chance to see beyond the carefully constructed images, to question what we are told, and to recognize the power of secrecy and narrative in shaping our understanding of history. Lady C's revelations challenge us not only to reconsider Meghan Markle's story, but also to confront the mechanisms by which truth and fiction are intertwined in public life. So, are you ready to uncover the truth? Are you prepared to see behind the veil of palace secrecy, to confront contradictions, and to witness a story that few could have imagined? Because what comes next is more than a simple exposé. It is an investigation into deception, manipulation, and the extraordinary lengths people will go to craft a story the world believes. And remember, the most shocking revelations are still to come. Lady C's evidence is just the beginning, and each detail we uncover will bring us closer to a truth that has been hidden in plain sight. The tension that had been quietly building throughout Meghan's time on Epstein Island finally reached its apex. The footage captures the moment not with fireworks or drama, but with subtle shifts in posture, micro-expressions, and the interplay of influence and realization. This was not a public argument, not a shouting match, but a confrontation of perception, power, and emotional truth, a climax that would later be described as one of the most revealing moments of the unsealed recordings. It begins innocuously enough. Meghan, having navigated the complex social landscape with grace and caution, is approached by a high-profile guest from Epstein's inner circle. The approach seems casual, a hand gesture, a smile, a question designed to appear polite and mundane. Yet every frame reveals layers of underlying tension. Analysts later noted that the approach was deliberate, a test of boundaries and response. Meghan, aware of the subtle choreography, pauses. Her body stiffens just slightly, her eyes flick toward the guest, and a micro-expression of concern crosses her face. She is about to be positioned, subtly, as the focal point of attention again. A role she has already come to understand is fraught with emotional pressure. The guest speaks, words inaudible to viewers but visible through Meghan's reactions. The camera captures her micro-responses, a tightening of the jaw, a shift of weight, a brief glance away. These are classic signs of someone processing complex social cues while managing internal emotional strain. The footage offers an almost cinematic view of emotional negotiation. Meghan is calculating, assessing, yet internally registering the discomfort of being placed once again under scrutiny. And then comes the first explicit emotional cue. A whispered remark, a subtle but pointed gesture, or a combination of both triggers a shift in Meghan's posture. Her shoulders slump, hands move to cover her face briefly, and her voice, soft, fragmented, repeats the phrase that would define this segment of the footage: "They used me." It is not an isolated reaction. It is a crescendo of emotion, a release of months, possibly years, of tension, frustration, and the quiet acknowledgement of being maneuvered into a role she did not choose. What makes this moment so striking is the duality of experience captured in the footage. On one level, Meghan is composed. She maintains eye contact. She responds verbally. She navigates the room with the poise that the public associates with her. On another level, the camera captures vulnerability in real time. Micro-tremors in her hands, subtle quivers in her voice, the rapid flicker of emotions across her face. Observers note that this juxtaposition creates a powerful narrative, a human being balancing resilience and exposure in an environment engineered for manipulation. The confrontation escalates subtly but significantly. Another guest, seemingly oblivious to the tension, makes a movement, a casual placement of a hand, a shift in seating, that compounds the emotional load. Meghan's reactions are immediate yet measured, a half step back, a deep inhalation, a brief touch to her hair. Each gesture is a signal, a negotiation, a micro-defense mechanism in the psychological landscape of the villa. Experts analyzing the footage describe these movements as adaptive responses to environmental stress, demonstrating emotional intelligence and situational awareness in high-pressure contexts. As the interactions continue, the footage reveals a pattern. Meghan is repeatedly positioned, subtly, as the focal point of attention. Compliments, gestures, seating arrangements, and conversational direction all converge on her. The social orchestration is invisible to the casual observer but palpable in the footage. Witnesses later explained that this was intentional, a method to heighten influence, test composure, and subtly extract compliance. Meghan's repeated acknowledgement, the whispered "they used me," reflects her acute understanding of this dynamic and her emotional reaction to it. The climax intensifies when Meghan temporarily withdraws from the group. She steps into a quieter space within the villa, and the camera captures the internal processing. A slow exhale, eyes scanning the floor, shoulders slumping in exhaustion. Here, the emotional reality becomes undeniable. She is no longer performing for social perception. She is reacting to cumulative pressure, recognizing the manipulation, and confronting her own vulnerability. The footage emphasizes the stark contrast between the poised public figure and the private human being navigating subtle coercion. Experts analyzing the footage point to a particularly telling moment during this withdrawal. Meghan's gaze lifts to the ceiling, her hands momentarily clasped, her voice a whisper of acknowledgement. The experts note micro-expressions consistent with emotional release, slight widening of the eyes, brief relaxation of the jaw, a softening of the lips. These signals indicate that she is processing intense emotional stimuli while maintaining enough composure to navigate the social landscape, if necessary. It is a moment of both surrender and resilience, a duality that defines the emotional climax. Witness accounts further illuminate the significance of this moment. Several individuals who were present describe Meghan's demeanor as tense, thoughtful, and profoundly aware. They noted that she seemed to oscillate between internal reflection and measured engagement with those around her. The social dynamics, already complex, were intensified by the subtle attention and positioning she received. Observers later emphasized that these dynamics were designed to elicit precisely the type of emotional response captured in the footage. Vulnerability, acknowledgement, and subtle protest. The confrontation's emotional weight is amplified by the camera's unflinching perspective. Every gesture, every glance, every micro-expression is preserved for analysis. Meghan's whispered words, "They used me," reverberate not just as acknowledgement, but as emotional testimony. The footage transforms private recognition into public evidence, allowing analysts, journalists, and eventually the audience to witness the human cost of social orchestration. And yet, even within this climax, Meghan's composure is remarkable. She does not collapse entirely. She does not break into tears in full view. Instead, she manages micro-releases of emotion, slight quivers, whispered words, and subtle body language. This measured response underscores her internal strength, her awareness, and her capacity to navigate extreme social pressures while privately processing the emotional impact. The footage becomes a study in human complexity, resilience intertwined with vulnerability, awareness intertwined with emotional release. The social dynamics during this confrontation reveal additional layers. Guests, intentionally or not, respond to Meghan's subtle cues. Microgestures, conversational shifts, and positioning all adapt to her presence and reactions. Analysts note that these interactions form a feedback loop. Meghan's micro-expressions influence the environment, which in turn influences her reactions. This loop intensifies the emotional stakes, contributing to the dramatic weight of the climax. Finally, the footage captures the moment when Meghan, after several minutes of internal processing, steps back into the group. Her posture is slightly more composed, her gaze steadier, her gestures more deliberate. Yet the emotional impact of the confrontation remains. Observers note that this re-entry marks a subtle but significant turning point. She has acknowledged her own vulnerability, processed the manipulation, and maintained enough composure to re-engage strategically. The climax does not end in collapse. It ends in profound human resilience, documented in every frame. By the end of this chapter, the narrative is undeniable. Meghan Markle, placed in a high-pressure, orchestrated environment, experiences acute emotional stress, subtle manipulation, and moments of profound vulnerability. The confrontation captured in the footage reveals both the human cost of social orchestration and her remarkable capacity to process, endure, and navigate the environment. Witness accounts, expert analysis, and the footage itself converge to create a multidimensional portrait. Emotional, psychological, and profoundly human. What if the entire story of Lilibet, the little girl whose birth was celebrated around the world, was built on a foundation of illusion? The very name, Lilibet, evokes history, royalty, and continuity. It is a name that carries the weight of lineage, a bridge between the past and the present, a symbol of the monarchy's enduring legacy. And yet, according to Lady C, the story we have been told about this child may be nothing more than a carefully crafted myth, a narrative designed to shape public perception, protect reputations, and conceal a truth that few were meant to discover. The first question we must ask is simple. Where did the idea of Lilibet come from? On the surface, the story is straightforward. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry welcomed a daughter, Lilibet Diana, into the world. Royal announcements were made, media coverage was immediate, and social media erupted with images, speculations, and congratulations. The world was invited to participate in a moment that was framed as intimate, yet universally significant. But when we dig deeper, cracks begin to appear. Lady C has spent decades observing the inner workings of the royal household, and her perspective provides a rare glimpse into how narratives are constructed and maintained. According to her, the birth of Lilibet was enveloped in layers of control, secrecy, and orchestration. Every announcement, every photo opportunity, and even every detail released to the press was carefully curated. The palace is an institution where appearances are everything, and what the public sees is often a carefully selected version of reality. This means that even a story as seemingly joyous in public as a royal birth can be manipulated, framed, and staged. One of the first inconsistencies that Lady C points out is the timing of events surrounding Lilibet's supposed birth. Public announcements claimed one sequence, but insider documents suggest a different timeline entirely. According to Lady C, staff schedules, hospital records, and private communications hint at discrepancies that cannot easily be reconciled with the public narrative. These are not trivial errors or minor lapses in memory. They are patterns that emerge when multiple sources are cross-referenced, patterns that suggest someone is deliberately shaping the story to fit a particular narrative. Consider, for instance, the way the world was introduced to Lilibet. Images were released selectively, carefully cropped, and shared with the media under strict conditions. Public appearances were choreographed, with every angle, gesture, and word designed to project authenticity and intimacy. But Lady C notes that in her experience, such precision often indicates the opposite, that what is being presented is a version of reality, carefully controlled, rather than reality itself. The intention is clear: to convince the public, the press, and even other members of the royal family that a child exists, whether or not that child is actually present. Adding to this are the peculiar absences and silences that have surrounded Lilibet's story. Where are the candid, unguarded moments? Why are there so few verifiable photographs outside of official releases? Why are certain individuals, staff members, medical personnel, and even distant relatives unavailable or silent when pressed for confirmation? Lady C explains that in the palace, silence is often a tool. It protects those in power, conceals uncomfortable truths, and prevents the public from piecing together a narrative that the institution would rather remain hidden. In other words, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, it is evidence of control. But beyond the logistics and timing, there is a deeper layer to this story: the symbolism of Lilibet herself. The name carries immense weight, directly tying this child to Queen Elizabeth II, whose personal nickname was Lilibet. In choosing this name, the narrative aligns Meghan and Harry's daughter with the monarchy's legacy, suggesting continuity, acceptance, and legitimacy. Yet, as Lady C points out, the strategic use of symbolism can also be a form of manipulation. By invoking historical significance, the narrative gains credibility, making it more difficult for the public to question the reality of the story. Even skepticism seems almost sacrilegious when the symbols involved are so revered. The mythology of Lilibet extends beyond her name. Stories about the child's behavior, milestones, and interactions with family members have been shared selectively, often through intermediaries, carefully filtered social media posts, or staged appearances. Each story reinforces the illusion, creating an emotional connection between the public and a figure who may not exist. Lady C emphasizes that the power of myth lies not in what is visible, but in what is believed. The more people invest emotionally, the harder it becomes to disentangle fact from fabrication. There are also contradictions embedded within the public narrative that demand attention. Reports of Lilibet's first public outings, christening ceremonies, and family interactions often conflict with one another when timelines are scrutinized. Staff schedules, transportation logs, and official invitations suggest events occurred in ways that do not align with the reported chronology. Lady C's insight is crucial here. She explains that such contradictions are rarely accidental. They are symptoms of a story being manufactured, adjusted in real time to maintain consistency with the evolving public image. When these contradictions accumulate, the plausibility of the public narrative begins to unravel. At this point, it's natural to ask, why would anyone go to such lengths to fabricate the existence of a child? Lady C provides context that is as fascinating as it is disturbing. According to her, the narrative serves multiple purposes. It protects reputations, both within and outside the palace. It secures public support for Meghan and Harry's image. It manages expectations of the monarchy itself, projecting a seamless continuity that reassures the public. And most importantly, it shields the family from scrutiny, creating a controlled environment in which inconvenient questions are never asked and uncomfortable truths remain buried. This leads to a troubling realization. If the existence of Lilibet is indeed a fabrication, then the emotional connections, public celebrations, and media frenzy surrounding the child are all part of a constructed illusion. Millions of people have invested emotionally, believing in the innocence and joy of a new royal arrival, unaware that the narrative may have been engineered for entirely different purposes. Lady C stresses that this is not about disbelief for disbelief's sake. The evidence she presents is methodical, detailed, and consistent, designed to withstand scrutiny. The story she tells is coherent, linking timelines, documents, and personal observations into a compelling, unsettling narrative. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, public perception remains firmly anchored in the official story. Meghan is widely celebrated as a devoted mother. The royal family continues its ceremonial role, and media coverage reinforces the existence of Lilibet. This is precisely the challenge of exposing the myth. The power of belief, tradition, and media amplification makes it difficult for alternative narratives to gain traction. Lady C's revelations threaten not just a single story, but the framework by which stories are accepted and believed in the first place. In exploring the origins of Lilibet, we are not merely questioning the reality of a child. We are probing the mechanisms of power, narrative control, and perception management within one of the world's most secretive and scrutinized institutions. We are asking uncomfortable questions. How much of what we see is real? How much is crafted to serve interests we cannot fully perceive? And if the narrative of Lilibet is fabricated, what else in this carefully curated world might be similarly manipulated? The origins of Lilibet, as revealed through Lady C's testimony, are more than a story of a single child. They are a window into the intricate machinery of palace secrecy, the strategic use of symbolism, and the deliberate shaping of public perception. Every announcement, every photograph, and every staged event contributes to a tapestry that is difficult to unravel, but not impossible. Through careful analysis, insider accounts, and the courage of witnesses like Lady C, the illusion begins to crumble, revealing the unsettling reality beneath. But just as we start to piece together this narrative, new questions emerge. If Lilibet never existed, how were staff members complicit? How did the media become an unwitting participant in the fabrication? And perhaps most pressing of all, what motivated Meghan and Harry to participate, or to allow such an elaborate construction to take place? Lady C hints at answers that are both shocking and deeply human, revealing motivations, pressures, and strategic considerations that have remained hidden until now. And just when we think we are beginning to understand the full picture, Lady C drops her first bombshell. There are documents, unseen by the public and never reported, that provide proof of what she claims. Documents that confirm inconsistencies, timelines, and the deliberate crafting of the Lilibet narrative. The very evidence that could validate her claims exists, and yet has been hidden for a reason that is both strategic and sinister. What comes next will take us even deeper into the heart of the palace, into rooms where secrets have been stored for decades, and into the lives of individuals whose actions have shaped one of the most extraordinary narratives of modern royalty. And as Lady C prepares to reveal more, one fact becomes painfully clear. The story of Lilibet is far from over. The myth is being dismantled piece by piece, and what emerges may be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Imagine discovering a set of documents so explosive that they could rewrite the story of one of the most closely followed royal families in the world. Documents that, if authentic, call into question everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the existence of Lilibet. Lady C, the palace insider whose observations have already started to shake the narrative, claims to possess exactly that: papers, letters, and memos that were never intended to see the light of day, hidden away in private archives and secure locations within the royal estate. And according to her, these hidden papers tell a story that no public announcement, no media coverage, and no staged photograph has ever revealed. The moment Lady C first approached the idea of revealing these papers, she knew the magnitude of what she was dealing with. These weren't casual notes or routine internal communications. These were documents that reflected decisions, observations, and strategies regarding the construction of Lilibet's narrative. The careful planning behind every announcement, the orchestration of public appearances, and the timing of disclosures were all embedded within these records. To the untrained eye, they might seem bureaucratic, mundane even, but to someone who knows how to read between the lines, they are a roadmap to deception. The first set of papers, according to Lady C, consisted of internal communications between palace aides, medical staff, and Meghan's personal team. These documents outline precisely how Lilibet's arrival was to be presented to the public, what images were to be released, and which narratives would be emphasized. Every word is meticulously chosen, every timeline carefully arranged, and every potential risk anticipated. The level of control suggested by these documents is extraordinary. It's not just a matter of announcing a birth. It's a coordinated effort to craft a reality, one that the public would accept without question. What makes these papers especially significant is not just their existence, but the inconsistencies they reveal when compared with public statements. According to Lady C, some memos reference events and details that directly contradict timelines given in official announcements. Hospital visits, nanny schedules, and staff rotations do not align with the story presented to the media. Even small details, such as the alleged time of birth, who was present in delivery rooms, and the recording of certain milestones, are inconsistent across various documents. To Lady C, this is not accidental. It is evidence of a narrative being actively constructed, maintained, and protected. One particularly striking memo, she reveals, discusses a photo opportunity involving Lilibet. The note specifies which angles should be shown, how lighting should be used, and even how the child should be dressed to convey a sense of authenticity and warmth. On the surface, it reads like a simple planning document, but when examined in context with other evidence, or rather, the absence of supporting evidence, it raises a troubling possibility. What if Lilibet, as a living child, was never present? The emphasis on how to stage her presence rather than simply document it is a red flag that Lady C insists cannot be ignored. Another set of documents relates to the communication strategy surrounding the birth. These internal plans detail how the press should be informed, which social media posts should go live, and how to manage public perception if questions arose. They even anticipate potential contradictions in statements, instructing staff to deflect, misdirect, or delay answers to preserve the intended narrative. In other words, the story of Lilibet was not only manufactured but actively defended against scrutiny from the outset. Lady C stresses that such proactive management is unusual, even in the palace, and indicative of a larger effort to maintain an illusion. As these revelations began to surface, Lady C faced skepticism. How could she prove that these documents were real, and more importantly, what they implied? Her answer came in the form of meticulous cross-referencing. Every memo, note, and internal communication was matched against staff schedules, transportation logs, and publicly available reports. Patterns emerged. Discrepancies that could not be reconciled with the timeline presented to the public, gaps in information that raised more questions than they answered, and a level of coordination that suggested deliberate fabrication. It became clear to her that these hidden papers were the cornerstone of a narrative designed to convince the world of something that may not have existed at all. The emotional weight of this discovery cannot be overstated. Lady C describes a mix of shock, disbelief, and ethical dilemma as she sifted through the documents. On one hand, revealing this information could destabilize public trust in the monarchy, create media chaos, and bring intense scrutiny upon herself. On the other hand, the moral imperative to expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or explosive, was impossible to ignore. She understood that these papers, and the story they told, were far too important to remain hidden. The documents also shed light on the inner workings of Meghan Markle's team, revealing the extent to which messaging, timing, and public perception were managed. Every social media post, every statement to the press, every carefully released photograph was coordinated according to these plans. Lady C notes that this level of control goes beyond typical public relations management. It suggests a premeditated effort to create a narrative that may not correspond to reality. If true, it is a revelation of staggering magnitude, a story about a child, presented to the world as genuine, meticulously orchestrated from start to finish. Perhaps the most shocking element of these papers is what they imply about the existence of Lilibet herself. While the documents never explicitly state that the child does not exist, they emphasize how her presence should be simulated, how appearances should be staged, and how staff should respond to questions about her. The careful attention to crafting the perception of Lilibet's existence, rather than simply documenting it, is what makes Lady C suspicious. In her professional assessment, the emphasis on presentation over substance is a hallmark of narrative construction. It is one thing to celebrate a real event. It is another to manufacture belief in an event that may never have occurred. Lady C further reveals that these hidden papers were intentionally buried, never meant to be accessed by journalists, historians, or the public. Stored in private archives, behind locked doors, and referenced only in internal discussions, they were safeguarded to maintain the integrity of the narrative. Accessing them required a combination of trust, discretion, and persistence, qualities that Lady C possessed as an insider. She emphasizes that the deliberate concealment of these documents suggests the stakes were incredibly high. The narrative of Lilibet's existence was not just a story, it was a carefully guarded secret. As we examine the implications of these revelations, one cannot ignore the broader context. If Lilibet's existence was carefully orchestrated, what does this say about the monarchy, the media, and the public's understanding of truth? Lady C argues that this case is illustrative of a larger pattern: the creation and management of narratives to protect reputations, control perception, and prevent inconvenient truths from surfacing. Lilibet may be a singular example, but it demonstrates the lengths to which institutions, and the people within them, will go to shape reality. By now, the audience should begin to grasp the significance of Lady C's first revelation. These hidden papers are not trivial. They are a window into deception, secrecy, and narrative construction at the highest levels of the royal family. They challenge our assumptions, force us to question the authenticity of public events, and open the door to a story that is as controversial as it is captivating. Every memo, note, and internal communication becomes a clue, a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, threatens to overturn the story of Lilibet entirely. And yet, even as we absorb the weight of these documents, Lady C hints at something more: evidence beyond the papers themselves. Testimonies, photographs, and corroborating observations exist, each reinforcing the conclusions drawn from the memos. The hidden papers are just the beginning. They point to a broader network of evidence that has been carefully managed, obscured, and protected. The implications are enormous. If these documents are accurate, and if the additional evidence aligns, the story of Lilibet as the public has known it may collapse completely. The question now becomes, what will happen when this narrative is challenged publicly? How will the monarchy respond, and what impact will it have on Meghan Markle's image? Lady C warns that the answers are as unpredictable as they are explosive. The hidden papers, after all, are more than a record. They are a revelation. A key that unlocks a story the world was never meant to see. And as we prepare to examine the next layer of this exposé, one fact is clear: the revelations contained in these documents are only the tip of the iceberg. When a story as explosive as the alleged non-existence of Lilibet begins to emerge, one of the first things you notice is the deafening silence surrounding it. The kind of silence that is not merely absence of sound, but deliberate, calculated, and all-encompassing. Lady C, our insider, has spent decades observing the inner workings of the royal household, and she knows exactly how this silence operates. It is not an accident. It is a tool, a strategy, and in this case, a shield protecting a narrative that may never have been true in the first place. The silence begins with the royal family itself. Official statements, public appearances, and interviews rarely stray from the carefully constructed image of normalcy and tradition. Even when rumors circulate or inconsistencies are noted by the press, the family's response is measured, muted, and strategic. Lady C emphasizes that this is not a lack of awareness. It is the opposite. Those closest to the monarchy know exactly what is happening, and the choice to remain silent is intentional. Every pause, every carefully worded statement, and every absence from media discourse serves a single purpose: to maintain control over the narrative. Consider the timing of announcements related to Lilibet. While the public was fed stories of milestones, first appearances, and celebrations, behind the scenes, documents suggest a different reality. Staff were instructed on how to respond to inquiries, what information to release, and, crucially, what to withhold. Lady C describes these instructions as part of a sophisticated communication strategy, one designed to prevent leaks, protect reputations, and obscure inconsistencies. Silence becomes the weapon of choice. It is easier to maintain a narrative through omission than through confrontation. The silence is amplified by the media. Mainstream outlets, whether intentionally or not, often reproduce official narratives without question. Headlines are written, photographs are circulated, and social media commentary amplifies the story, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the illusion. Lady C points out that this complicity is not always conscious. Journalists often rely on sources within the palace, and when those sources only provide curated information, the resulting coverage inevitably mirrors the desired narrative. In effect, the silence of the palace creates a vacuum that the media fills with the story the family wants the world to believe. Inside the palace, the mechanisms of silence are even more pronounced. Staff members, many of whom have spent decades in service, are trained to speak cautiously, avoid speculation, and protect confidential information at all costs. In Lady C's words, you learn quickly that a question is a test. How you answer, or if you answer at all, can determine whether you remain part of the inner circle or are quietly sidelined. When whispers about Lilibet's existence arose, staff were instructed not to comment, not to acknowledge inconsistencies, and above all, not to contradict the official narrative. The result is a culture where silence is a survival tactic, a means of preserving one's position and avoiding repercussions. This silence extends to Meghan and Harry themselves. Publicly, they maintain the story of Lilibet as a living, thriving child. Privately, according to Lady C, their behavior and communications suggest a keen awareness of the contradictions in the narrative. The choice to remain silent, or to reinforce the story selectively, raises difficult questions. Was the silence a protective measure, shielding the family from scandal? Or was it part of a broader strategy to perpetuate a narrative that had been carefully constructed from the beginning? Lady C's observations suggest that it may have been both. The impact of this silence is not only operational, it is psychological. For staff, observers, and even members of the royal family, the absence of clear communication creates uncertainty, anxiety, and speculation. People begin to fill in the gaps themselves, often drawing conclusions that align with what they are led to believe. In this way, silence becomes more than a defensive tool. It becomes an instrument of manipulation. By withholding information, controlling access, and carefully curating appearances, the palace guides perceptions without ever speaking directly. Yet, the silence is not uniform. Certain individuals, like Lady C, have chosen to break it. By stepping forward, she challenges the assumptions that the public has been asked to accept. Her revelations expose contradictions, inconsistencies, and deliberate omissions that the silence was meant to conceal. The very act of speaking becomes an act of defiance, a way to disrupt the carefully maintained narrative and bring hidden truths to light. And it is this disruption that begins to unravel the story of Lilibet in ways that are both dramatic and shocking. One striking example Lady C provides involves a series of communications between senior staff members regarding media inquiries. These messages instruct staff on how to respond if pressed about Lilibet, emphasizing vague language, deflection, and avoidance. In one memo, the phrase "do not confirm or deny" appears repeatedly, a tactic designed to preserve ambiguity and prevent independent verification. Lady C interprets this as a critical indicator that the story being presented publicly was subject to manipulation, and that the family was deeply concerned about controlling perception. Another layer of silence comes from the extended royal network. Relatives, advisors, and consultants who might have insight into Lilibet's existence often choose discretion over disclosure. Lady C suggests that this is partly out of loyalty, partly out of fear, and partly because the entire network benefits from maintaining the illusion. The more people who participate in the silence, the stronger the narrative becomes, and the harder it is for outsiders to challenge it. This creates an echo chamber in which belief is reinforced by the absence of contradiction. The silence also has the effect of intimidating potential whistleblowers. Staff members who might consider revealing inconsistencies are confronted with the reality of career consequences, social ostracism, or legal threats. Lady C recounts several instances in which individuals were warned, subtly pressured, or reminded of confidentiality agreements when they asked questions or noted anomalies. This culture of fear ensures that the public narrative remains intact, even in the face of internal doubt or suspicion. Yet, silence alone cannot sustain a story indefinitely. Eventually, inconsistencies accumulate, evidence surfaces, and questions become unavoidable. Lady C points to specific moments when staff schedules, hospital logs, and private correspondences began to contradict the public story. At that point, the palace faced a choice: continue the silence and risk exposure, or actively manage the emerging contradictions. According to Lady C, the choice was made to double down on control, reinforcing the narrative and attempting to shape the perception of truth through selective disclosure. The question then arises: what is being protected by this silence? Lady C is clear. What is at stake is not only reputation, but authority, influence, and legacy. The monarchy relies on public belief, trust, and legitimacy. If that trust is undermined, the institution itself is threatened. By controlling the narrative, maintaining silence, and managing inconsistencies, the palace preserves not only the story of Lilibet, but the stability of the family as a whole. In this sense, silence is not a void. It is a calculated form of power. But the silence has consequences. For the public, it creates confusion, doubt, and speculation. For the staff, it fosters anxiety and mistrust. And for Lady C, it presents both a moral and professional dilemma. When do you break the silence? And what are the risks of revealing truths that others wish to remain hidden? The answers she provides are illuminating, revealing a delicate balance between loyalty, ethics, and the pursuit of truth. Even as we consider the mechanics of silence, the emotional stakes are undeniable. Lady C recounts moments of profound frustration, witnessing events that contradicted what the public was told, and seeing colleagues coerced into complicity. The weight of this knowledge is heavy, compounded by the understanding that millions of people have been led to believe a narrative that may not reflect reality. And yet, her willingness to speak out demonstrates courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that the royal family's silence is not simply absence of communication. It is a deliberate, strategic, and protective measure. It shields a narrative, controls perception, and maintains the illusion of normalcy. And while silence may have protected the story of Lilibet for a time, Lady C's revelations threaten to pierce that veil, exposing inconsistencies and hidden truths that have remained obscured for years. And just as we begin to grasp the weight of this silence, Lady C drops another bombshell. There are insiders willing to speak, documents that contradict the narrative, and evidence that will force the palace to respond. The calm, controlled exterior is cracking, and what emerges next will challenge assumptions, ignite controversy, and leave the world questioning everything it thought it knew. From the very moment Meghan Markle entered the public eye as part of the royal family, her narrative has been carefully managed, meticulously crafted, and consistently reinforced. Every statement, interview, and public appearance has been polished to project a certain image: a loving mother, a devoted wife, a modern royal breaking with tradition while honoring its legacy. But according to Lady C, behind this carefully constructed facade lies a series of contradictions that raise serious questions, particularly regarding Lilibet's existence. The inconsistencies are subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but when examined closely, they form a pattern that cannot easily be dismissed. Take, for example, the public accounts of Lilibet's birth. The official narrative provides specific details, dates, times, and hospital locations, all presented as verifiable facts. Meghan and Harry appeared to celebrate milestones openly, sharing carefully curated images and anecdotes. Yet, when Lady C cross-referenced these claims with internal documents, staff schedules, and medical records, discrepancies began to emerge. One memo referenced a hospital visit that did not coincide with the announced birth date. Another indicated that key staff were unavailable at times when public statements suggested they were present. Even minor details, such as the reported arrival time of Meghan's team at the hospital, conflict across multiple sources. To Lady C, these are not simple errors. They are indications of deliberate narrative construction. Then there are the interviews themselves. Meghan has often recounted personal moments involving Lilibet, describing milestones, behavior, and intimate interactions. On the surface, these stories are heartwarming and believable. But Lady C notes that several of these accounts contain inconsistencies when compared with publicly available evidence or staff recollections. For example, in one interview, Meghan described an interaction with a nanny at a specific time and location, yet internal schedules suggest that the nanny was elsewhere. In another instance, a milestone described in detail conflicts with the timing of a reported family gathering. Alone, these contradictions might be overlooked, but collectively, they paint a picture of a narrative that may not fully align with reality. Social media has also played a crucial role in shaping Meghan's story. Carefully staged posts, selective photographs, and controlled glimpses into family life have created an image of normalcy, warmth, and authenticity. Lady C points out that while the posts appear spontaneous, the coordination behind them is anything but. Lighting, angles, props, and even background details are orchestrated to convey a sense of reality while limiting opportunities for scrutiny. The effect is subtle but powerful. The public believes they are seeing candid moments, when in fact they may be observing a carefully engineered illusion. Another area of contradiction lies in the responses to media inquiries. Meghan's team, guided by internal communications referenced in Lady C's hidden papers, often provided vague or conflicting answers regarding Lilibet's presence, activities, or milestones. Statements sometimes shifted between interviews, social media posts, and press releases. The inconsistencies are particularly notable when cross-referenced with staff accounts and private correspondences. According to Lady C, such contradictions are not random. They are the byproduct of maintaining a controlled narrative in real time, adjusting the story as needed to align with public perception. Even more striking are discrepancies in Meghan's own recollections. Lady C has observed that her accounts sometimes evolve depending on context, interviewer, or medium. Certain details emphasized in one interview are absent or contradicted in another. While memory lapses are natural, the patterns here are suggestive of narrative adjustments rather than simple forgetfulness. Lady C believes these adjustments are a response to external pressures, media attention, palace scrutiny, and public expectation, rather than mere inconsistencies in memory. The contradictions extend beyond mundane details to emotionally significant events. Stories of bonding moments, first smiles, and private family interactions often conflict with logistical records. Staff recollections, medical logs, and private correspondences sometimes contradict the timelines and scenarios presented publicly. Lady C argues that the persistence of these contradictions, coupled with the deliberate management of information, supports the possibility that the narrative of Lilibet may have been constructed or embellished, rather than observed as an objective reality. Perhaps most revealing is how these contradictions intersect with the hidden papers Lady C exposed in the previous chapter. Internal communications emphasize staging, presentation, and media perception over the actual events themselves. The careful orchestration of public appearances aligns with the inconsistencies in Meghan's public accounts, suggesting that the narrative of Lilibet was not merely celebrated but manufactured. It is the alignment of internal strategy with external storytelling that forms the core of Lady C's claims. These contradictions also raise deeper questions about intent. If Meghan knowingly participated in a narrative that contained inconsistencies, what was her motivation? Was it a desire to protect privacy, a strategy to maintain public favor, or something more deliberate? Lady C suggests that while some inconsistencies may have been motivated by convenience or discretion, others appear to be strategically designed to construct a version of reality that aligns with specific objectives that may have required concealing the truth about Lilibet. Critically, these contradictions are not easily dismissed by the public. In the age of digital records, social media, and investigative journalism, discrepancies are quickly noticed, documented, and amplified. The more people dig into timelines, photographs, and public statements, the harder it becomes to reconcile the inconsistencies. Lady C emphasizes that the contradictions are cumulative. Each one may seem minor, but together they form a web of narrative tension that challenges the authenticity of the story. Even allies and commentators have occasionally noticed these contradictions. Some journalists, commentators, and royal watchers have raised questions about timelines, appearances, and the nature of Lilibet's public presence. While many of these observations are dismissed or downplayed, Lady C notes that they represent the first cracks in a carefully maintained facade. The very fact that these inconsistencies attract attention, even sporadically, demonstrates the fragility of the narrative. And yet, despite all these contradictions, the narrative persists. Meghan's public image remains largely intact, and the story of Lilibet continues to be accepted by many as truth. Lady C explains that this persistence is a function of controlled messaging, selective disclosure, and the inherent power of belief. People are predisposed to trust official narratives, particularly when they are reinforced by media coverage, social symbolism, and emotionally compelling storytelling. In this way, the contradictions are obscured, overlooked, or rationalized, allowing the narrative to survive despite its inconsistencies. By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that Meghan's story contains layers of contradiction, both minor and significant. Each discrepancy, when analyzed alongside hidden documents, staff recollections, and internal communications, suggests that the narrative of Lilibet may be less about observed reality and more about constructed perception. Lady C's analysis points to a careful orchestration of events, statements, and appearances designed to convince the public of a story that may not fully correspond to truth. And just when it seems the contradictions are already damning, Lady C hints at an even more startling revelation. There are moments where evidence exists that directly contradicts Meghan's claims in ways that cannot be reconciled through simple narrative adjustments. Documents, photographs, and eyewitness accounts converge to suggest that the very existence of Lilibet may have been manipulated or even fabricated entirely. The implications are staggering, and the next layer of evidence promises to turn the story upside down. In any story of secrecy and deception, those who work behind the scenes often hold the keys to the truth. Lady C, with her decades of experience inside the palace, knows this better than anyone. While public narratives are carefully crafted, the staff, nannies, aides, drivers, and medical personnel observe reality as it happens. And in the case of Lilibet, their testimonies reveal details that are seldom shared publicly, inconsistencies that raise serious questions, and moments that suggest the story may not be what it seems. The first thing Lady C emphasizes is the culture of discretion that permeates the palace. Staff are trained from the moment they enter service to speak carefully, avoid speculation, and maintain loyalty above all else. Breaking this code can mean losing employment, facing social ostracism, or even legal consequences. This creates an environment in which silence is not just encouraged, it is required. For decades, staff have internalized this principle, observing events without comment, recording details privately, and carrying the burden of secrets that the public will never see. Yet, even within this culture of silence, patterns emerge. Lady C recounts her first conversations with key staff members who, while cautious, hinted at anomalies surrounding Lilibet's presence. Nannies described schedules that didn't align with official accounts of the child's milestones. Drivers and security personnel noted absences at times when public appearances suggested otherwise. Housekeepers and aides observed rooms set up for photo opportunities, with props and arrangements that gave the illusion of a child being present. Taken individually, these observations might seem trivial, but collectively, They reveal a tapestry of carefully staged appearances designed to convince observers, and by extension, the public, that everything was ordinary. One staff member, who had been responsible for organizing Lilibet's supposed nursery, shared a striking detail with Lady C. According to their account, certain items in the nursery were rearranged repeatedly, not for the child's comfort, but to maintain a particular visual narrative for photographers and visiting officials. Toys were positioned to suggest interaction, seating was arranged to imply presence, and lighting was adjusted to highlight what little evidence existed. The staff member emphasized that these adjustments were meticulous, ongoing, and orchestrated from above, suggesting that the focus was less on the child's needs and more on creating a convincing illusion. Medical staff offered equally intriguing insights. According to Lady C, hospital liaisons and in-house physicians reported schedules that conflicted with the official birth announcements. Certain personnel who would have been present during delivery were documented as being off-site at critical times. These discrepancies, while perhaps explainable in isolation, gain significance when cross-referenced with other staff testimonies and internal communications. Lady C interprets these inconsistencies as evidence that the public narrative of Lilibet's birth may have been carefully managed and possibly manipulated.